Hi all, we're just allowing people to join and get their audio working before we start. Welcome to everyone joining. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes. I know with Zoom, you have to make sure your audio is all connected. So we'll just give people a bit of time to get connected. Got about 250 of you at the moment. So hi all. The numbers are still going up, so we're just going to wait for a few more people to join. So we'll make sure everybody's in before we start. Give it until about 5 past. Brian, I'm hoping you're keeping an eye on the Q&A for me if there's any technical questions.
I am, yeah, I've answered one already.
Fabulous, thank you. Are we staying stable on the numbers, Brian?
Yeah, we're now up to 301.
Thanks all for joining. Just give people a couple more minutes. The numbers are still going up on people joining, so just want to give everybody a chance to get into the room. Looks like we're slowing down, so I'm going to start if that's okay with everyone. This session is being recorded and that will be shared afterwards as well for those people that haven't been able to join live. So good morning, welcome to our Radio Teleswitch metering information session. I'm Danny Barnes, I'm Director of Development and Partnerships at National Energy Action. I'm really pleased to see so many join this session to understand a bit more about the upcoming switch off and what it means for our clients and how you can all help support with raising awareness to existing RTS customers of what they need to do before the 30th of June date. I'm delighted to be joined by Jamie Flaherty, Principal Policy Expert from Ofgem, David Speake and Mark Pitchford, who are representing Energy UK. As you can tell, the session's being held on Zoom, and whilst you can see us, we can't see you. So please do make use of the Q&A function throughout the session. We are running from 11 till 12:30 this morning, but that does include quite a large chunk of time for questions at the end. So hopefully we might be able to let everybody leave a bit earlier, but it does also mean that there will be sufficient time to go through questions. If there are anything that we are unable to answer during the session, what we will do is we will get back to everybody after the session with responses to those questions. So just moving through the objectives of today. So during the session, we plan to cover what the Radio Teleswitch, here on referred to as RTS, so I don't get into a tongue twister situation, what the switch off means in practice, share insight on where meters are across England, consider some of the implications to customers, and crucially talk through what more we can do to help customers understand the action they need to take. Our colleagues from Energy UK will share some of the regional data on RTS meters and highlight some of the recent partnership work, and thankfully will also be on hand to support with some of the more technical questions later on at the end of the session. We'll also hear from Ofgem about the work of the industry task force, an overview of the campaign, which went live in January and hopefully many of you have seen, and the toolkit that has been developed to support tech stakeholders. Hopefully that sounds very much like what you've all signed up for, and given that you've all joined an NEA information session, you know who NEA are. So National Energy Action, we're the National Fuel Poverty Charity. We operate across England, Wales and Northern Ireland and work closely with our sister charity, Energy Action Scotland. Huge part of our role is to raise awareness of issues impacting people living in fuel poverty and advocate for what changes need to be made to ensure that they can live in a warm, safe and healthy home. And that's why we were really keen to host these webinars to help raise awareness amongst our stakeholders and partners about how this may affect the people that you work with day to day. We know that amongst the RTS customer population, there is likely to be a disproportionate number of customers who are in or at risk of fuel poverty. And as such, we've been working really hard with Energy UK, with UK government and Ofgem to evaluate the scale of the issue, the impact on vulnerable consumers, and highlight the significant risk of detriment to those households who we know can least afford it. We've always been and remain most concerned by those individuals who might be reliant on energy to manage health conditions. So I'm going to start with just a very brief introduction around what RTS is. What does it mean? So radio teleswitch meters use radio signals to tell some older electricity meters when to switch between peak and off-peak tariffs. So you've probably come across customers who are on economy 7, economy 10, other time of use tariffs like total heat, total control. These customers may have an RTS meter in situ to tell the supplier when to switch between peak and off-peak rates. As at the end of December, we believe there to be around 700,000 RTS meters in situ. Of around 535,000 of those are in properties that will be impacted by the switch off, and of that about 500,000 will be in domestic properties. I'm going to allow David later on to talk a bit more detail about the difference between properties affected and number of meters when he covers the regional data. So as I mentioned earlier, RTS meters allow suppliers to offer different tariff rates so customers can make use of a cheaper off-peak rate to heat their home and hot water. The service was introduced in the 1980s and at its time was actually quite an innovative solution to electrical heating and hot water. However, the infrastructure is now reaching the end of its operational life, and the Electricity Networks Association, ENA, has taken the decision to return the service due to ageing technology. It is an industry-wide service and all energy suppliers are contacting their customers to arrange an upgrade. As at the end of December, all suppliers should have made contact with their RTS customers to offer them an upgraded meter. Whilst there are areas where there are higher numbers of RTS meters, it remains a GB-wide issue. So I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to give a little bit more detail about the numbers of RTS meters and where they exist. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Danny. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Speak. I'm working for Energy UK, and my colleague, you can see also on the screen, Mark Pitchford, who'll be chipping in with some of the Q&A activities later on. Energy UK, you may be aware, is the trade body for organisations within the energy industry, particularly suppliers, generators, and other newer members would include people like EV charge companies and those sorts of companies. Known as the voice of the energy industry, we do policy work, lobby and support work, but also importantly, we do work where we provide a central, coordinated approach to the sorts of challenges that we're facing here. And so the RTS activity is a great example where energy suppliers are really just pulling together to move things forward and ensure there's a minimal customer detriment at the end of this process. Danny's mentioned our numbers here, and we have been doing quite a bit of work on these numbers recently. 700,000 RTS meters out and about across Britain, and that's just the raw number in terms of the physical assets that are out there. How many would we count if we took them all out and put them in a pile now. What we've got on the left-hand side, if you have a squint at that map there, is we mapped the location of all these meters based on supplier data, and it shows that we have, of course, quite a number in Scotland. There's about a third of all RTS meters up in Scotland, but they're everywhere, in fact, all the way down through England, and we've got some in Wales as well. And the regional breakdown is there. We do, and we're able to break them down even further than that, and that's what we've been doing when we've been speaking to stakeholders such as organisations on this call here, to work through some of these challenges and to reach out in terms of getting support in partnership to get some messaging over to customers to ask them to contact their suppliers. I think there is a really good example of some of that partnership activity would be where we've been talking to local authorities, and there'll be many of you on the call today. For example, in Brighton, we've identified Brighton as a hotspot area where there are more than the normal level of RTS meters across that Brighton and Hove City Council region. And what we're doing there is that we're working with colleagues within Brighton and Hove Council, and we are leveraging their local wisdom, their expertise on what works locally in terms of messaging. They know their local residents. They have great partner networks all the way down to the hyper-local organisations that support energy activities in their area as well. And so it's been invaluable to be talking to them, to have them on side when we are wanting to, for example, launch a media story, get some information out to the newspapers. They know who to talk to, and they've been very, very helpful in doing that for us. And so we certainly encourage as many conversations around those sorts of activities as we possibly can off the back of this. And I'm sure Danny will be able to share our contact information afterwards. Just looking at some of these hotspots across England now, I have picked out London, the Southeast and the Midlands, so you can see where we've got some really dense areas. And that's not to say that we should forget the areas that have got the lighter patches here, and these are postcode districts. They will still have meters that we need to get to, customers we need to talk to, meters we need to replace. But this has allowed us to really focus some of the marketing campaign activity that we've got going on, and indeed it allows us to be able to plan appropriately in terms of availability of resources to cover the demand for these meter upgrades. I think that's all I was going to say on hotspots, Danny. Apart from the more conversations we can get going with local partners to support work in those hotspot areas, the better. So yeah, please do feel free to reach out to us afterwards.
Thanks, Dave. So just going to take you through a little bit about how you can actually tell if somebody has an RTS meter. And in all honesty, the most effective way is actually to contact the energy supplier. However, there are some indicators that can help you tell if your clients have one. Firstly, and most obviously, it might actually have an RTS label on it, but unfortunately that doesn't apply universally. So other indicators include potentially having a separate switch box near the meter, typically a black box. If the property is heated with electricity for heating and hot water, no gas supply to the home, or the customer gets cheaper energy at different times of the day, such as the customers we mentioned earlier, those on Economy 7, Economy 10, or the Total Heat, Total Control tariff. The most reliable way, as I mentioned, is to reach out to the supplier, as in some properties there can be some old infrastructure that's been left behind, which is no longer in use, or it just simply might not be very obvious that it's an RTS meter in situ, which I appreciate adds to the confusion amongst customers, and why we very much seek your support in helping those customers that might not be sure, but why we're ultimately encouraging everybody to reach out to their supplier as soon as possible. I think I've mentioned this already, but for us, the concern has always been and continues to be the potential impact on vulnerable consumers. We've been actively engaging with UK government via DESNZ to highlight that thousands of vulnerable customers could be at risk of loss of heating and hot water when the signal is switched off, or if there's a major fault before then. So it has been a frustration that we haven't prioritised this sooner than we have. However, the overarching message is that homes and businesses with RTS meters do urgently need to get them upgraded before the 30th of June. The main solution for the majority of households will be switching their RTS meter to a smart meter, although we do know that that won't be the solution in 100% of cases, although it will be for the majority. And in those situations where a smart meter isn't an option, the supplier will work very closely with the customer to work out what the solution will be. Customers who remain on RTS meters at the end of June may see a number of potential impacts. It's unknown exactly which impacts they may face, including storage heaters potentially charging at the wrong times, loss of heating and or hot water, or inaccurate or sustained on-peak pricing. So we know that the meters are likely to act unpredictably, and for that reason, it really is quite critical that customers engage with their supplier. We've been assured by the suppliers that they are ready to receive those contacts and will be prioritising those upgrades for RTS meter customers. So I guess, in short, the scale of the challenge is quite significant and the risk of detriment is substantial, and the time we have available to us is pretty tight. So we are seeking your collective support to help encourage customers to reach out to their supplier. If they've received a letter, please respond to it. If they haven't received a letter, but you know that they've got an RTS meter, make contact with the supplier. And also, please highlight to us when things aren't going as expected. We're really keen to understand where things aren't working as they should be, so we can look at what remedies need to be put in place. I'm going to hand over now to Jamie from Ofgem to talk a bit more about the work today and the tools available to support you.
Nearly
Hopefully,
started speaking there on mute. An old Zoom faux pas. Yeah, thanks very much, Danny. What I'll do is, first off, I will speak about the role of the task force and the local media and awareness campaign, but I thought it'd be useful as well to just go over some of the kind of supplier obligations in relation to RTS and kind of Ofgem's more role more generally as a regulator. So I think, as we mentioned in numerous open letters and in our communications to date, RTS meter replacement upgrades is a critical priority for Ofgem. I think our role within this is holding suppliers to account for delivery and ensuring they are focusing and prioritising on the resource for RTS customers. I think we've been concerned that the kind of slow pace a year out from the switch off, and along with Energy UK, with David and Mark that are on the call, formed the RTS task force, which you may have heard of. So that launched a call to action following an RTS summit in Glasgow late last year, which put in place commitments regarding prioritisation and resourcing for RTS. So the task force itself is made up of Ofgem, Energy UK, DNOs, suppliers, and what that looks to do is put the onus on suppliers to take major steps in terms of resourcing and contacting customers to ensure that they receive an upgrade ahead of the 30th of June. So that kind of call to action asked, as Danny mentioned earlier, that all suppliers reach out to all of the RTS customers before the end of 2024 so that they can outline what support meter upgrade options are available to them. So our expectation that all suppliers should have contacted all their customers by now. In addition to this, we've requested and supplier RTS action plans, which we've scrutinised in detail, where we've asked them to detail their capacity, customer journey, approach to RTS replacement, and we're monitoring progress on this monthly. So what I would say there is, as Danny mentioned, if on the ground colleagues on this call are seeing this is not the case, this is obviously cause for concern, and we urge you to report kind of any instance of this through to NEA or directly to ourselves at Ofgem, so we can understand if there's remaining blockers out there and whether there's anything we can do to assist in this. So I think in terms of the obligation side, suppliers have existing obligations in place through the licence conditions. So SLC 0, treating customers fairly. SLC 4 requires suppliers to efficiently and effectively identify risks and mitigate against them. and 39 is the overall smart meter rollout replacement obligation. So I think while the obligations are clear and they should incentivise the replacement of RTS, what we're doing within the next week, we'll publish a consultation on strengthening these obligations further to put in place more robust protections for customers, which ensure that our expectations on supplier, which I mentioned there previously, are explicit. So while we are the regulator, and while I've went into that detail on the regulatory obligations and our role, we've also kind of worked in partnership with the suppliers via Energy UK and Smart Energy GB to help launch a national awareness campaign and a local hotspot activity that David mentioned there previously. So that national awareness campaign went live a couple of weeks ago, featuring targeted adverts via television, video on demand, YouTube, where Lorraine Kelly explains the RTS switch off, the need for RTS customers to take action ahead of the June deadline when they're contacted by their supplier. And this is supplemented by local press, national targeted radio clips. And as mentioned at the start of this call, that is also complemented by an RTS toolkit developed by my comms colleagues. Within that toolkit is a link which is populated with a range of materials to support organisations, individuals about what RTS is, why it needs replaced, as well as a pretty in-depth and continuously updated Q&A document, which answers FAQs for use by anyone. So it's happy to be circulated amongst the organisations on this calls, service users, in which you can essentially look through, and it should hopefully answer the bulk of questions in relation to RTS that you've got. And then if there's anything else which doesn't fall within that Q&A, then you can obviously reach out to our market stakeholder team. I think we could post the email on the end of this call to ask direct questions, and we can do our utmost best to answer them. So as a result of the kind of task force work to date, we've seen more than a doubling of RTS meter replacements since then. I think last month was 28,000 replaced, but I think that just is testament to the fact that there's still some way to go. I don't think we're naive or underestimate the challenges involved in replacing these meters in the time available. I think that is why we kind of need suppliers to hold up their kind of end of the bargain in terms of scheduling and fulfilling appointments with customers in a timely manner. I noticed that there's conversation in the Q&A there about scheduling, fulfilling appointments is something that we are taking very seriously given the uptake in comms. We want to make sure that that sees through and we see actual exchanges and meters being replaced and off the wall and replaced with another appropriate arrangement. So that's why we're going to, whilst we focus on ramping up this comms activity, the scrutiny of suppliers won't be left behind, and we'll be focusing on making sure that their arrangements are in place to support customers. And that also includes, whilst we're looking at how we scale up replacements in the months coming to June, we've also been considering for some months now what arrangements in terms of support and mitigations can be offered to customers post switch off, which is also a critical priority. There may be a case that customers are going to remain with an RTS meter following the 30th of June. It's our intention that suppliers will have robust processes in place to identify these customers and make sure that they get adequate support, whether that be 24-hour metering appointments, same-day call-out times, or billing arrangements on the back end. So yeah, with that, I'll pass back to Danny now.
Thank you. So as James talked about there, we have got a number of resources available to support you. The RTS toolkit, this is a link, so when you receive the slides afterwards, you'll be able to link through directly to the toolkit and access the frequently asked questions along with a number of resources that are available. Although it's worth highlighting that some of the customers you support may not speak English as a first language. So for those of you that are aware, Citizens Advice and NEA both have accessible toolbars within their website, so we can make sure that you can access translated information via both of those routes. So I would encourage you to take a look at the frequently asked questions, identify if there are any gaps or any questions that aren't being answered, I can see there's already over 30 questions in the Q&A within this call, so lots of questions to kind of cover off shortly. Maybe you won't get out as early as I possibly promised. There's also 2 emails on the screen now, which again will be shared after the call. As Jamie mentioned, there is the invite to contact Ofgem directly if you are seeing continued challenges or questions that you are unable to answer yourselves that you need support with. So we'd encourage you to make use of that, and particularly if you're seeing things not happen as expected, please do flag those issues. As I mentioned earlier, we do remain concerned that there isn't a plan B should there be a cohort of customers who haven't upgraded their meter by the switch off date, and the risk of detriment particularly to vulnerable customers in that situation. So we really are kind of quite pressing on Ofgem, government and others and industry to ensure that there are sufficient consumer protections put in place to mitigate any risks that exposes them to. One idea that we will be kind of talking through with the task force is around using the district network operators. We think they could be well placed to provide practical support to clients. We know that they're trusted. We know that they've got a robust infrastructure. They've got scale across GB. So we think that they could be a really big part of that solution should there remain customers not switched by the 30th of June deadline date. That finishes the main presenting information sort of session. I do want to say thank you because there's almost 400 of you on the call. So I really appreciate you taking the time to listen in and support. And we do have quite a good amount of time to support with Q&A. So I'm really pleased that we've got colleagues on the call to support with that. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to go into the Q&A and hopefully we can get through. Hopefully that's worked. Have I stopped sharing, everybody? Yes, fabulous. So it looks like a lot of people have answered questions already, but David, the first question there has got your name against it. Why are there 150,000 RTS meters which won't be affected by the switch off?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I not come across this I'd like to answer live before, so I was just about to type and I pressed that button, so I will answer it live. I think that works very well because I've got a very wobbly table as well. And there's 2 in this group that I've said I'd answer. The other one I think was a question further down, which was about I've got a RTS meter, but I've got a single-use tariff, or not got a time of use tariff on it. Do I still need my meter replaced? So I said at the start of my piece that I was going to explain the difference between 700,000 and 535,000. I didn't. And the answer is this. Your physical assets you've got out there is 700,000, but what suppliers have done is to go through those and identify those which fall into the category of we think will be impacted by the signal being decommissioned at the end of June. And that leaves the overspill of 150,000, which we don't think will be impacted by that. And so those remaining 150,000 might be a couple of examples here. Somewhere the supplier has spoken to the customer and said, look, I've got, I use a single rate tariff for whatever reason. So therefore that particular circuit that's driven by the RTS switch isn't in use. And the second quite substantial grouping here is customers who live in properties where the RTS meter was put in, for example, in the 1980s, but since there's been an upgrade to the heating and hot water system in that house, most likely to a gas central heating system. And so whilst they've got the same electricity meter as there always was there, they're actually not reliant on that to control their heating and hot water anymore. And instead, they've got an on-demand wet hot water system to keep them warm and to keep them clean. So those customers, we would put them in the bracket of you do need your meter replaced because we'd like everyone to get a smart meter at some point. But in terms of us prioritizing action to reach as many customers as we possibly can before June, we are obviously thinking about what that means and trying to make sure that only the customers who are absolutely definitely impacted are at the front of the queue, and others will get to at a later time if there's demand for a smart meter there. Caveat under all of that, of course, is that suppliers are doing a fair bit of analysis to identify the ones that they think are in the not impacted bucket. That means they're looking at not just, oh, I can see you've got a gas account, therefore I'm going to ignore you. they're going to the point of looking at the consumption on that gas account to decide whether or not, for example, it's just for heating food, maybe it's just a gas hob, versus much higher consumption at the property where they'll be using a heating and hot water demand. And then beyond that, it's a case of writing to them to confirm our expectation that they are not impacted. So there are steps in place to make sure we're not just putting people to one side and not asking for confirmation that that's the case. So that's the difference between those two sets of numbers. And yes, we are finding people who have long been on a single rate tariff because they're not using the RTS functionality anymore, and will be in that second pot. And again, if you are unsure, it's a case of ringing the supplier and just asking them the question, and they'll step you through the answer. So that was that one couple of groups of questions. The other one, clearly, whenever anyone flashes data up on the screen, there's a huge amount of interest in it, and it has been incredibly useful to be able to have this to hand, to be engaging with groups like this. The answer broadly is yes, we do have it at a more granular level than just that high level hotspot map. We use that to have a look at hotspot campaigns and that sort of thing. But I'm able to do things like slice it and dice it by local authority, by ward, local areas within cities and local authorities. We use it to talk to MP constituents about what the size of the issue is in their parliamentary constituency. And so there are different ways of working with it. We do have it currently at that level, and we'll be hopefully continuing to refresh that as we move through towards June and keep that view up to date. So I think the answer you're looking for is that Danny and I will work to provide, probably not the easiest way to do it in a pretty looking map like that, but a table of local authority breakdown and such that we can send around with materials after this call. And then beyond that, you've heard Jamie refer to the toolkit. That is an online SharePoint resource that once you've got the link, you are able to access the contents of that. And I'll be keeping a view of this data by those various cuts in that toolkit for people to go in and access. Clearly, I can't go right down to the very most granular levels because of GDPR considerations. You obviously can't give row by row customer level data out, but we are able to provide those very useful views at a fairly local level to allow you to get a grasp of the size of the issue that you're working with in your local area.
Fabulous, thanks, David. There's kind of a cluster of questions around a similar theme, and that's around the theme of people not wanting a smart meter, and what is the options for those customers. How do we support those customers? Obviously, we talk very widely around the benefits of smart metering and how they can provide a broad range of kind of more accessible, more accessibility for a lot of clients that have them. But we do know that there is a cohort of customers who don't want a smart meter. What are the solutions for them in this situation? Are there any?
Yeah, I can take that. Obviously, in the bulk of replacements for RTS, the optimal kind of result is a smart meter there, just because it offers kind of time of use tariffs, the ability in many cases to get a like for like tariff or something very similar, and offers kind of greater control over the consumer's electricity usage. I think what's important is Ofgem, obviously we want to see more smart meters on the wall, but we've been clear with suppliers that our expectation is that this falls secondary to the consumer detriment angle. So therefore we expect that suppliers to have a range of solutions available to ensure that the customer does not experience disruption. A customer that engages with a comms programme, they should be available to access some sort of replacement. And I think really what I would say is that it's for the customer to speak individually to the supplier. They have a range of options. We're not privy to all the technical solutions that the supplier has in their hands, but we've been assured that there are non-smart options that are maybe available for a consumer who steadfastly refuses a smart meter, because, as I mentioned, the smart meters are not mandatory, they're not compulsory to have, But the key message here really is speak to your supplier about the options. It's their obligation to maintain appropriate meter arrangements for their consumer, so they should be able to direct them in the right way to make sure that there's an option there that's potentially non-smart. But as I mentioned, smart is the bulk of solutions is a smart meter.
Thanks, Jamie. Did anyone else want to comment on that around the technical solutions? There's also a question which I think it kind of mirrors the same answer, Jamie, around where smart meter just isn't an option. We know that in some cases a smart meter won't be an option for some customers. So presumably the same applies. Suppliers will need to work with those customers directly to identify the applicable technical solution for them. Yeah, super. So there's quite a few around. So there's one around the actual capacity of the supply chain currently to replace all of these. Are we confident that there is capacity to change all of the meters that require changing between now and the end of June? Pretty pertinent question. Go on, Mark. Oh, you've got no sound. He's got no sound, David. You're in the same room. Go on.
We're currently running at a rate of about 250,000 replacements a year, a month. So certainly there is more than enough capacity for that to switch into RTS replacement in the next few months, that up until the switch off starts.
Thank you. There's a question around the date of end of June and the fact that it had previously been extended. I think we're confident that this date won't be extended now, but I will ask the question just so I've done the question justice. The 30th of June is the deadline.
Yep, the switch off will commence from the 30th of June.
So there's a few questions around here around leaning in, and I think, Jamie, this is one for you, leaning in on suppliers to ensure that they meet the obligations. So there's been a couple of colleagues that have experienced suppliers saying that they don't have a solution. And obviously these are anecdotal and perhaps the occasional incident, but they are happening, and we have actually seen that amongst our own advice team as well. So I guess what kind of reassurance can you give that you are leaning on suppliers to ensure that they do uphold their side of this?
Yeah, but obviously I mentioned previously that we have kind of implemented these supplier action plans where we've asked for kind of clear milestones for the supplier and their forecasted targets for exchange, in which we are utilising to hold them accountable and understand where gaps in progress and underperformance lies. And I think we've been fairly clear that whilst we have those existing obligations in place that I mentioned before, we are consulting on new kind of strengthened obligations, which are specific to RTS meters, this consultation will go live next week, which will give us added kind of tools in our regulatory box to apply pressure onto suppliers. And I'd say that in instances, obviously Mark's just mentioned there that the rate of smart meter replacement right now is around 250,000 a month. So there is an engineer capacity there, but it is concerning that we're hearing kind of reports from consumer groups, charities like yourselves, that this is not translating to on the ground work. And I would urge kind of where instances are required of this is happening to refer it to us at that mailbox so we can look into it and understand whether it's a job for our compliance enforcement colleagues at Ofgem, which sit without my team, but that's the kind of route that we'll go further down as we near the replacement deadline.
Thank you. A couple of questions in the Q&A around any cost to the consumer. So if they have to have a meter relocated or any cost to the switchover, what if they can't afford that? Is there any safety net being put in place, any sort of hardship support available to ensure that people can have the replacement fitted, but not at a cost to them? Who wants to come in?
I'll let David go first.
Go on, David.
Sure. So to be clear, the meters are replaced at no cost to the consumer. The potential cost arises, and just to flesh out that description a bit more, where, for example, there are the nature of the installation of the property means that the meter replacement cannot go ahead. The supplier is unable to work within the restrictions, say a meter box that's too small, a kitchen that's been remodeled around things. We've seen other, to give you extreme examples, someone's moved their staircase, so in fact it goes the other way. The meter was at the top of the stairs, it's now 12 foot in the air, hanging on the wall. Those sorts of things are not within the current remit of the supplier to fund changes to. And so that obviously causes great difficulty. At the moment, the supplier would inform the customer that that would be the reason why they can't make the meter exchange, and advise them to investigate whether they can get the metering position appropriately adjusted so that the supplier can come back. Obviously, not just for fuel poor customers, all sorts of customers can't currently afford those sorts of costs. And with standard smart upgrades, clearly there's an option to walk away and decide not to get a smart upgrade in those cases. With RTS, this feels a little bit different, okay? And so we've been talking to Ofgem and other organisations about whether or not there's scope to look for some sort of central funding mechanism over and above the existing grants that are there for other reasons that you may or may not want to dip into for this particular reason, because we think it will be a much clearer and more effective way of addressing these sorts of concerns where actually the customer hasn't got any choice but to have their meter exchanged, and so needs some help with that sort of cost.
There's quite a number of questions in the chat around the toolkit. So just to reassure everybody on the call, we will be sharing a link to the toolkit after this session, and it does include all of the assets and materials that you've seen on the screen today, along with numerous others. So we will make sure that everybody has access to that. There's also a few examples within the chat of things not going as expected. So just a reassurance to colleagues again on the call that we will be sharing the script with Ofgem and Energy UK and others, so we can look at those on a case-by-case basis. There's one question here which I suspect Jamie and David or Mark, you can all come in on, but from our point of view, there's a question around licence conditions and customer service expectations and setting up dedicated RTS support teams at the supplier's end. Now, I've spoken to a couple of the suppliers and I am aware that they have trained up specialist teams in some suppliers. I don't know if that's universal, but also customers that they know who have RTS meters that are calling in will be routed straight to that team through their call handling centres. But is there anything more on that? Is that universal approach? I'm only aware of a couple because they mentioned it at a recent call. And is there anything more we can do to make sure that does happen universally so that consumers are always getting access to the most accurate, up-to-date information?
Yep. We are pushing Ofgem on this side for suppliers to take that as a universal approach to make sure that support is in place. You might have seen at the tail end of last year we consulted on 24/7 emergency metering support. So the consultation is closed and I think it's due for decision within the next month or so. But where that will make it, if they go ahead with it, that will make it compulsory for all suppliers. But in the interim, we are pushing suppliers to make sure that these arrangements are in place for customers. From the supplier action plans that we've received, I would say that the vast majority of suppliers have in place these dedicated teams, and where they don't, we've asked the question, why not? I think our expectation is that if you want to facilitate a swift replacement, then you need to put these customers in contact with the correct person as fast as possible, given the time-sensitive nature of the replacement programme.
The other there's quite a few questions around landlords and landlord permissions. David, did you want to come in on that last question? Sorry, I saw you would go off mute.
No, just to support Jamie, from the Energy UK perspective, we we don't get full visibility of all suppliers' operational plans, but we do act as that coordinating party. And what we are doing is running regular supplier best practice sessions to share the best ideas. And this is one we were talking about just last week or the week before. The idea that actually, you know, we've got to make sure, and there's another comment on here around ringing up and people not knowing what RTS was, which is not good enough. We need to make sure that we do put in place these specialist teams who are properly trained for this next 6 month duration.
Brilliant, thank you. There is a few questions around landlord and landlord consent. Obviously, if it's the bill payer that gives the consent to replace the meter, so that shouldn't be a barrier to engaging with a replacement from RTS. But do you have any kind of advice or thoughts around private landlords and if they try to kind of intervene or prevent?
Yeah, I think there's just two angles to this, Danny. One is to say that it's not a new issue. It's an issue that's been around since we've been doing the smart rollout, and suppliers' relationship is with the bill payer, whether that's the landlord or the tenant, of course. What we are trying to do from the other end here, as part of the task force activity, is to educate landlords, private landlords in particular, through, for example, the Association of Letting Agents, to make sure that there's a bespoke message going to those parties, because actually it's quite possible that when if and when something does go wrong with the heating system in these properties, it may not be the energy supplier that's getting the phone call, it will be the landlord getting the phone call. And so we want to get that message of urgency over to landlords as well, to help to give the tenant the confidence to facilitate these exchanges that need to happen.
There's a question in the chat around scammers taking advantage of this. So the fact that suppliers are reaching out, is there any engagement happening to support with kind of scam awareness, fraud awareness, and with the relevant organisations that can support with that to mitigate against any risk to consumers?
Not that I'm aware of through the engagement discussions on the task force. I think it's a fantastic idea and we should take it forward. So whether, Danny, you can help us with that as well, because you will have experience of that, I suppose.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thanks for the person that flagged that. There's a couple of questions around the exact impact and the precision of what we know about the impact on vulnerable consumers at the point of switch off if they're still on an RTS meter. I think it's fair to say, from my understanding, is unpredictable. So we can't say with any certainty exactly what a vulnerable consumer will experience in that moment. But it is likely that they may find that they remain on peak pricing, or that their hot water or heating no longer works as it should. I think that's as precise as we can be, but do correct me if I'm wrong, colleagues on the call. I think it's going to be an unpredictable outcome.
You can hear me this time. Yes, that's exactly the behaviour we're expecting. So the switch load part of the consumer circuit will cease to operate, and that may mean that heating and hot water circuit is permanently enabled or permanently disabled, or it may mean that it's enabled at the times of the day that aren't commensurate with their normal operation. So their heating or hot water charges at the wrong time of day, during the peak hours, for example. So that's the kind of things we need to watch out for.
Thanks, Mark. And is it true that there are some non-RTS old style Eco 7 meters out there that should remain unaffected after the switch off, as they use the internal clock to change rates? I think the answer is yes, but Mark, over to you.
Correct, exactly that. It's only where there is a radio signal that drives the switching from peak to off peak where the consumers are affected. So any other mechanical time switches or any other mechanical switches are unaffected by this. Purely the radio signal that's behind the Radio Teleswitch, that's what's being disabled.
Brilliant. There again is a few questions in the Q&A around costs. There should be no cost to the consumer for an upgrade. And I think obviously David talked to kind of grants available if there's like a relocation need. that does have a cost up front. But there should be no direct cost to the consumer for upgrading their meter, particularly to a smart meter. There's sort of a plea across a number of the questions around suppliers and how they can access suppliers for additional support with this. So I guess a bit of a plea back to Ofgem around how stakeholders that are supporting customers with RTS meters can get almost like a direct line into suppliers or into the RTS specialist teams to make sure that they can support clients through the process, particularly those clients that may be kind of reticent to engage directly with their supplier for various reasons that we're probably all aware of around kind of trust and potentially language barriers as well. So I think that's kind of a plea from a number of people on the Q&A. Do shout, there's 90 questions in here. So if any of you've noticed a question that you want to pick up, do feel free to kind of just let me know. Jamie, you quoted an Ofgem regulation code which didn't actually appear on the screen. Would you mind repeating it so that people can jot it down, please?
So it's SLC 0 and 39, which covers the smart meter rollout.
A question around tariffs. So obviously we know that a number of people will be on sort of economy 7, economy 10 or kind of bespoke RTS meter tariffs. Will they get the equivalent tariff when upgrading to a smart meter?
We've kind of set out an expectation to suppliers that we expect them to take all reasonable steps to offer as close to replicate the consumer's previous tariff, if not a like for like, or as close as possible. While we've set out this expectation, we'll be looking to consult on proposals which make this potentially mandatory. So as I mentioned earlier about a consultation coming forward, that will be published next week with our considerations around that on tariff offerings for RTS customers that seek an upgrade, to essentially make sure that there's protections there to avoid being no worse off as a result of seeking an upgrade and engaging with the RTS programme.
Jamie. There's a follow-up question, Mark, to your comment earlier around 250,000 installs per month. Is that smart meters overall or RTS meter changes specifically?
So there are some RTS installations included in that figure, but it is primarily smart meter installs, which could encompass an RTS install or just a normal traditional meter.
There's a few queries around sort of language barriers of customers and how they can be more effectively supported. Obviously, I mentioned earlier that there are accessibility tools within some of the web pages to help with kind of the description of the issue, but that engagement with suppliers, have suppliers made access to things like language line or things that can support them to support those customers effectively?
From a starting point on the supplier side, suppliers already employ those sorts of services where required. Generally speaking, for incoming call centre queries, of course, the element through the task force and the engagement activity, and particularly the Ofgem toolkit and those assets that we are using to put the message across. Ofgem have made a start, of course, providing in Welsh as they have to. The discussions we've had with local authorities have been enlightening and very useful, in particular because local authorities tend to, quite often in areas where there are large populations of non-first language English speakers, they tend to have colleagues, employees and services that they themselves use to engage with their local residents. And we are thinking about whether or not there's some merit in seeing whether we can coordinate work on the toolkit as it is through some of those local authorities who have the capability to turn some of those into the more common alternative languages. There's a discussion that we've got to just carry on having through Ofgem and Energy UK at this point in time. But it's certainly on our radar because, to give you an example, one of our hotspot areas that we're keen to talk to local organisations is Leicester, and we think there'll be a requirement there for putting out some different materials in different languages.
We've been working quite closely with Leicester City Council, so happy to kind of support with that if we can help at all. There's quite a few questions. I think the relocation and potential cost issue is the one that's causing the most concern amongst stakeholders. What I would kind of say to colleagues on the call, but also to colleagues that have joined externally, so let's take that away and kind of try and map it out really clearly around what the options will be, because if I think at the moment it's a maybe this or a maybe that or a maybe this, and I think we need to be a bit clearer to best support stakeholders that are coming across those issues. I know they should be few and far between where there is a cost implication, but we know that they will happen. So I think we probably need a more satisfactory response to colleagues on the call. So
and can I just underline the issue just with responding to Sam's question, which may just be the wording, but I want to be absolutely clear. So Sam has asked whether if a resident is presented with a charge for upgrade to smart meter, what are their options? And this, I think, goes back to the scam issue as well. The supplier will not at any point present the customer with a charge for the smart meter upgrade, even in those cases at the moment where there may be a requirement for remedial works outside of the supplier's remit. It would be this needs doing, and the expectation at the moment that the customer would go away and engage a third party in order to progress that. And so we wouldn't even be asking as a supplier for money to move the cupboard, to put a bigger meter box on, all those sorts of bits and pieces. So scam awareness, definitely, and then maybe some merit in thinking about wording such as we will never be asked to pay a charge for having a meter upgrade.
In the majority of circumstances, this should happen with no charge whatsoever. There are some unique circumstances, I think, within the Q&A, and we've seen this particularly in the East Midlands, where there's like asbestos backboards that need removing to enable the works to happen, and where does that cost sit? So just in those more unique occasional situations, there may be a cost that needs to be found, and we recognise that vulnerable consumers can't be bearing that cost. So we need to work out how we can support them with where they would find the funding to make that happen, to enable them to have an upgrade. But we will take that away kind of and talk a bit more about it, so we can give a bit more of a clearer response on what support might be there. I'm just checking if there's any others. I think most of these have been answered now. If anybody can spot any that haven't.
There was one, Danny, around non-communicating smart meters being installed, so dumb meters for lack of a better term. Obviously, there may be cases where lack of WAN signal results in a pre-configured meter being installed. What I will say is obviously that this limits the customer's ability to realise the full benefits of the smart meter. But there may be cases where this has to happen just as an interim measure to ensure that continuity of supply for the customer going forward. What Ofgem expects is that there's a licence condition to make these meters operational, licence condition. So as solutions such as the deployment of 4G comms hubs and the other kind of technology comes to fruit, we would expect that suppliers would take steps to make sure that these meters are communicating once again. But there is a possibility that a meter may be installed in dumb mode just to ensure that the customer is not kind of experiencing detriment instead in case of interruptions to the heat and hot water supply.
Fabulous, thanks, Jamie. There's a question around service level expectations around the time it takes to get a meter kind of replaced in the home. Are there any service level requirements from the point at which customer requests one, the time that they can be expected to wait before they're able to have the upgrade? I don't believe there is, but
there's guaranteed standards of performance in place for suppliers, which set out kind of expectations in law around when an appointment should be scheduled and when it should be fulfilled. I do not know it off the top of my head, but happy to circulate that information following the call. It lies within our team.
Thanks, Jamie. So we'll come back to that one, Fiona. Thank you for asking. Our very inclusive NEA representative, Nikki Swetnam, has asked about making sure that assets are available in British Sign Language. We know that we do have a deaf community that wouldn't be able to necessarily access written assets. Is there any plans to ensure that comms around this is in BSL?
I'll
if not-
take that back to my comms teams. Very good point.
We've still got lots of questions. Thanks all. This is brilliant. Can either David or Jamie supply us with a figure of how many RTS meters are likely to be in situ as of the 30th of June?
It's hard to make an exact determination on this, but given current rates of replacement, we expect that there will be a significant amount still there as of 30th of June. We're obviously starting to see rates of replacement ramp up. I think last month there was more meters replaced than ever across the last couple of years. So obviously the success of the kind of comms campaign, suppliers ramping up their resource as well, will factor into a determination on this. So at this stage, we're probably unable to give an exact figure on how much we expect, but we know that there will be meters there. And I think that is why, as part of the kind of other work stream of Ofgem's work, whilst we've got one work stream focused on expediting rates of replacement, the other just important work stream is looking at what support is there for customers that still have a meter on the wall following the 30th of June. It's something we're taking very seriously and is a kind of key priority there. And it's why we're looking at it now in the start of the year, rather than getting further down the line and scrambling to have plans in place. It's our intention that these mitigations and supports are in place well in advance of the shutdown date. So apologies for that kind of non-answer there on the exact number, but that's the best I can do for now.
Thanks, Jamie. There's, I guess, perhaps more of a suggestion than a question, is that will suppliers be able to charge a lower rate until the smart meter is installed post RTS switch off? I suspect things like that are a consideration around about how we mitigate some of the risks, but a suggestion from Jack there about perhaps suppliers could be offering a lower rate to mitigate that risk until the replacement is available. Can we have assurance from industry colleagues or Ofgem that suppliers are prioritising RTS upgrades over kind of typical smart meter installs? Because we know that some people are on a long waiting list for just getting a smart meter regardless of the RTS issue. So do we know that suppliers are prioritising this?
Yeah, obviously smart meter, Ofgem regulates, suppliers are set targets for how many smart meters they install over the course of a year, and Ofgem monitor the performance against these and take action, as we have done in the past, through enforcement and compliance and fining suppliers for underperformance. I think we've been clear to suppliers that we would take into account the prioritisation of RTS customers when we evaluate performance over the course of the year. So that is, yes, we are implicitly stating that we expect them to prioritise these cohort of consumers, given the risk of detriment and the impending time and the deadline coming up. So yeah, we are asking suppliers to prioritise these customers.
And the flip side of that coin, of course, is that obviously suppliers are hearing Ofgem loud and clear, and it's actually very, very helpful to have those sorts of messages coming through, because all through the supplier organisation, they are able to therefore put resources in the right place to make sure that the RTS customers this year are at the front of the queue, and that will mean, you know, taking the hit on the overall number of meters done, because actually these are, generally speaking, more complicated and lengthy installation activities than a standard smart installation would be. So fewer per day, often spread out, often rural, but absolutely right. It's a priority to get the RTS done this year and back to standard service afterwards.
Thank you both. So just a double confirmation of understanding from one delegate is, if households do have an RTS electric meter but are not using them with a time of use tariff, i.e. they now have a gas supply to manage heating and hot water, they shouldn't be adversely affected with the June 2025 shutdown, or should they be? Is the expectation that they are unlikely to be affected?
they're unlikely to be affected by the shutdown of the signal, because the signal, even if it's talking to the meter still, it's not actually doing anything at the meter end to their heating and hot water.
Thank you. Why do we have such a short timescale to the switch off date? I think it's fair to say that we had a longer timescale and it's been extended once. Any comments on the timescale? 3 times, okay. So it's been extended 3 times thus far. So actually we didn't have a short timescale until recently. Any comments on that from colleagues?
I think just to say that lots of moving parts, certainly in terms of getting rid of some of the installation of technical barriers, making sure we've got the kit that's needed to address some of these more complex installations, has meant that in terms of the smart rollout, they have been at the back end of the targeting campaign for lots of suppliers. We haven't just started to talk to these customers. Lots of them have been approached for some months, or in some cases for some suppliers some years now. So each supplier had a different approach to them. Yes, the deadline is looming. There has been, as Mark said, 2 or 3 extensions to that, the contractual arrangements that sit behind the RTS service over time. And those extensions were at the time to recognise the fact that we needed to get all the pieces in place and weigh that up against the risk of the infrastructure itself just getting so old that it fails of its own accord. We're now at the point where we believe that setting that deadline and sticking to it is actually the most useful way in terms of forcing the suppliers through the operational activities that need to make this happen, and secondly, to make sure that the customers are clear that this is a deadline and it's there to stay, and therefore we really like them to talk to us about getting the appointment.
I think from NEA's perspective, and I think any Energy Action Scotland will share this frustration, I think we have left it too late. I think there was a lack of coordination and ownership previously, which meant that we were kind of facing the deadline without necessary kind of urgency. But we do welcome the fact that it is now being prioritised significantly, and hope that we see a huge amount of upgrades happening over the next few months to ensure that the risk of detriment to our client group particularly is kept to an absolute minimum, and in an ideal scenario completely removed the risk, but we do have concerns, as I mentioned earlier, that won't be the case. We've talked a little bit about the fact that the smart install when replacing RTS is slightly more complicated. Do installers need a specific qualification or an alternative set of training, or could any installer, should in theory any installer be able to replace an RTS meter with a smart meter or alternative?
They don't need different qualifications, Danny. It's normally experience really for these, because some of these installations are 40 years old, and the wiring that accompanies them is 40 years old, so not necessarily up to normal modern standards. So that the experience around those older ways of wiring things up is different across the installer base. So some of the more experienced installers would take a shorter period of time to install a meter, and some of the new ones wouldn't. But it's really just suppliers are incentivized to keep their installers all trained to the right standards, and we are impressing on our members to make sure that installation goes as smoothly and as quickly as absolutely possible to minimize any disruption during the installation visit, but also subsequently to stop any problems with the switch off and impacts that could have on them.
Thanks, Mark. We talked a bit around the tariffs that would be offered once the upgrade takes place, and that being as comparable as possible to the tariffs that the person's moved from when they had the RTS meter. There is a question around if there is a differential in the costs, and if that's higher, is there any financial support going to be offered by the energy supplier to kind of match that differential? Or is there discussions around that specifically?
I think there's discussions in that consultation. That's one of the aspects we will look for, and we'll look for feedback and suggestions on that to make sure that the suppliers are providing some sort of like-for-like tariff to avoid what we're calling making sure customers will know what's off. It's an ongoing discussion which we'll hopefully have some movement on in the coming weeks, but it's not something I can provide a definitive answer to currently.
Brilliant. Malcolm, I can reassure from NEA's perspective, we have been feeding that into the task force and talking about what the safety net options might be to ensure that there isn't that differential between pricing, particularly given that we know that millions can't afford their current energy costs, so any increase is going to cause detriment. But thank you for asking that question. I think, is there an independent team we should consult if there are specific meter queries where the supplier hasn't been able to move forward with a meter change? Jamie, is it okay to say that stakeholders should flag that to the markets team? Or is there any other alternative?
Yeah, I'm happy for them to reach out.
I think we've answered that around supply chain. So there was an earlier question, sorry, Ed, apologies, I missed it. I missed that you asked it earlier. Whether those on priority services register will be highlighted for kind of additional support, perhaps hand-holding or additional engagement from the supplier to make sure that they are effectively supported through this process, recognising that they're more likely to be living in a vulnerable circumstance. Yeah,
there's obligation in place that should be the case. We collect monthly data on the amount of RTS customers that may be considered vulnerable or are on the PSR within a supplier's portfolio. So it allows us to see how many they've got there and what kind of processes they have in place to support them. So fully the expectation and what we believe suppliers should be doing is making sure they have specific processes in place for these customers, which differentiate from the normal kind of RTS replacement journey.
Thank you. There's a few questions which I think we have kind of captured in some of the answers already, but quite a lot of concerns around engineer appointments that are being offered post the end of June date. Is there any specific advice you would give to those customers who are being offered an appointment after the switch off date, even though they do have an RTS meter?
That shouldn't be happening.
I think we've both got a surprised face, haven't we, Jamie? Yeah. I'm surprised that a supplier is offering appointments that far out in advance, because normally they tend to be within in days and weeks. So months and months out is a little unusual. I think the request would be, as it always is with some of these more specific elements, please drop Jamie a note, or drop you a note, or us a note at Energy UK, and by sharing what information we can get to the bottom of who the supplier is and how that's happened, and follow it up directly with that supplier.
Will the meters, I assume, where possible, it'll be a like-for-like replacement, but there's a question around, will the meters be situated where the old RTS meter was in the first place, or will they be relocated to potentially make access easier for engineers?
It depends on the installation. It really does depend on the installation. The only reason I'm aware of that the meter would need to be moved where there isn't physically space to install the new metering equipment that would be necessary. So that's the only reason I can see where the meter would need to be moved. It's not for ease of access or anything like that. It's a physical thing.
There's a question around if a smart meter does need to be fitted in traditional mode, so it's a sort of dumb mode, not operating smartly, that would then disrupt the ability to operate a time of use tariff. So how would we explain that to clients and make sure that they understand the implication of going into dumb mode, because they would then lose that time of use capability?
A use of a dumb meter a smart meter in a dumb mode doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't got the ability to operate an on-peak and off-peak tariff. We have the facility to be able to deploy pre-programmed meters into these situations, as Jamie's alluded to earlier, and they can provide a switching facility for those particular installations.
So that'd be one of the alternative technical solutions, won't it? Are non-smart meters still being manufactured?
Sorry, I was too slow to get off mute there. No, they're just not available in the market. Any traditional meters that are being deployed are old, refurbished meters, but certainly no, they're just not available in the supply chain to buy.
So we talked a little bit at the end around the sort of the plan B post 30th of June. And from NEA's perspective, we're kind of wondering whether there could be a role for the DNOs to support with both the engagement, but also the kind of response to this. Do you agree with that? Are there conversations happening with district network operators specifically to kind of encourage that engagement with that specific cohort, recognising that we are likely to see some customers still on RTS meters?
Go first on that one. I can take that one. We've been working very closely with the DNOs on this throughout the whole period, and as we said right at the start of this, they are a fully paid up member to the task force, so that they're aware of the plans. We've got plans in place that for the wind down period post 30th of June, when the shutdown actually begins. And they're intrinsic to those plans, so they're fully aware, fully bought in as to exactly what's happening and when.
Thank you. I think, sort of going through all of the themes here, I think we've answered. Do energy companies 100% know where RTS meters are? Are we confident that they are aware of where the meters are located? I'll jump at once.
From what has been reported to Ofgem and from our bilaterals, we have confirmation that they have a comprehensive understanding of their portfolio. Therefore, they should know exactly where an RTS meter is located within it, and they should be prioritising based on all those metrics previously mentioned: vulnerability, PSR, gas connection. Is that kind of knowing and having that data readily available by a supplier allows them to do that prioritisation effort. So absolutely our expectation is that data should be held by a supplier, it should be up to date and accurate, and it will allow them to communicate effectively with the customer.
Fantastic, thank you. I think we've covered most of the themes throughout. I think it's a bit of a reminder to everybody on the call that the toolkit will be shared. Any specific kind of case-by-case issues that you're coming across, please do make use of the info@nea.org.uk, but also the market stakeholder email with Ofgem directly too. And we will see if we can address those on a case-by-case basis as appropriate. We will be sharing the recording, we will be sharing the slides and links to all of the available resources. I think with regards to some of the questions around cost implications, I think I can talk on behalf of colleagues on the call that there is a recognition that there could be a cost to consumers in some unique cases, and specifically any customers that are left with an RTS meter after the switch off. There is a risk of consumer detriment. From National Energy Action's point of view, we're very much kind of banging the drum to make sure that there is a safety net in place to support those individuals that may find themselves in that situation. And I think it's fair to say that Ofgem and Energy UK and others are very alert to that risk, and the kind of priority of the task force is to make sure that we mitigate against that. There are a lot of conversations happening to kind of address that issue. It's not something I think we can answer in full just yet, but hopefully over the coming months we'll be able to provide assurances on that. Is there anything else that we haven't answered or you would like to speak to, David, Mark or Jamie?
No, nothing further. As mentioned, happy to take any follow-up directly at the email in and get in touch. There's obviously been some issues flagged there in the chat, which individual cases which are a significant cause to concern, and particularly people getting scheduled for appointments past the June deadline date. So interested to hear more on that, and yeah, feel free to reach out directly. But thank you very much for the time.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank you
and
everybody for joining. Go on, David.
Just to say thank you, Danny, and thanks to everyone else on the call. It's really quite crucial to the activity of the task force that we get the engagement from all the organisations that are on this call, because we recognise how important they are to get that message across. Unfortunately, what we always say is, all everything needs to be routed through the supplier. We're the ones that can book the appointments. We're the ones that can go and do the replacement activity. But we recognise that sometimes it's difficult and people don't want to open the letters from suppliers for obvious reasons, when, for example, they might be in debt or something like that. And so those other trusted voices out there, we recognise as being a critical part of this activity, and we really welcome anything that anyone can do to help to get that message over.
Thanks, David and Mark.
Thank you, David. I was going to say exactly the same thing. We really want your help in getting the messages out to these consumers that the RTS switch off is a real thing. We can't extend it anymore. It's too frail to extend anymore. So we really need these consumers to contact their supplier to get these meter upgrades booked. That's the imperative thing.
Yes. Thanks all of you. I really appreciate your time joining this webinar. There is another webinar for Wales colleagues on Monday, and then there will be a session for Scotland colleagues happening towards the end of February, date to be confirmed. Again, just reiterate the thanks to everybody for joining. Do please flag when things aren't working. We can only learn if we know what's not working in practice, so please let us know. Just a commitment from NEA, we will go through all of the questions. There was in total 124 questions. There was quite a few in the list, so hopefully we themed them fairly accurately, but if we didn't, we will make sure that we address any that we haven't answered sufficiently fully enough. And we will pick up the scam comment specifically, as well as the relocation cost risk, which we know will only happen in occasional instances, but may happen from time to time. So it's important that you have an answer to those customers that might be affected. So thank you all. I appreciate all of your time, and take care. Have a lovely rest of your day.